It's the early 1900s, and American troops are out there in the Philippine-American War, realizing real quick that their standard issue 38 long Colt revolvers are about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. These moral warriors they were up against? Let's just say they had more determination than a toddler trying to escape bedtime. The 38s were barely slowing them down, which, is kind of a problem in a firefight. The US Army needed something with more punch. Enter the 45 ACP. John Moses Browning, who, in my humble opinion, was the Leonardo da Vinci of firearms, whipped up this powerhouse of a round, and by 1911, the military made it official with the adaptation of the M1911 pistol. And boom, history was made. This round went on to serve in both world wars. Vietnam, and just about every major conflict in the US, has been in since. It's like that one relative who keeps showing up to every family gathering. No matter how many years pass, it's always there, and it always makes an impact. The wild, the weird, and why did they do that? But here's where things get a little weird. See, the 45 ACP wasn't just used in standard issue sidearms. Nope, over the years, gunmakers decided to get a little creative, sometimes to brilliant results, sometimes not so much. Ever heard of a 45 ACP revolver? Yeah, that's right, a cartridge designed for a semi-auto pistol, shoved into a wheel gun. Some manufacturers tried it, and let's just say the results were about as awkward as me trying to understand TikTok trends. It worked, technically, but it wasn't exactly the most practical move. And then there were forgotten guns, oddball firearms chambered in 45 ACP that made it about as much sense as pineapple on pizza. Don't come at me for that one. Some of these experimental designs barely saw production, and others were straight up abandoned before they even hit the market. A few had unique concepts like making 45 ACP work in compact, almost pocket-sized pistols, which is kinda like putting a V8 engine in a go-kart. Sounds fun, but it ain't exactly practical. But here's the kicker. The 45 ACP was so good at what it did that even decades later it found itself right back where it started. During World War II, Filipino guerrilla fighters were once again using 45 ACP chambered pistols, this time against Japanese invaders. Talk about coming full circle. The same cartridge that was created because of battles in the Philippines was now being used by locals to fight back. See, back in World War I, the US Army found itself running short on M1911 pistols, and that was a problem. The 45 ACP was doing work on the battlefield, and they needed more sidearms chambered in it. Fast. Enter Colt and Smith & Wesson, who were tasked with adapting their large frame revolvers to take 45 ACP ammo. The 45 ACP is a revolver cartridge. Now, there's a problem with that idea. Revolvers are meant to use rimmed cartridges, since that little rim at the base lets them sit snug in the cylinder and get ejected properly. But the 45 ACP, it's rimless. It was made for semi-autos, where the extractor does all the work. That should have been a deal breaker, but necessity is the mother of invention. And in this case, necessity had a name: Joseph Wesson. Yep, the Wesson from Smith & Wesson. This man looked at the problem, scratched his head, and came up with a brilliantly simple solution: half-moon clips. These little metal clips held 3 rounds together, letting the cartridges sit securely in the cylinder and pop out all at once when you're done shooting. And just like that, the M1917 revolvers were born. The M1917 revolver goes to war. These revolvers weren't just some janky backup plan either. The M1917 went on to serve in multiple wars: World War I, World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam. Some tunnel rats carried them in the tight claustrophobic underground battles, where the stopping power of a 45 ACP round at close range was exactly what you wanted when you turned a dark corner and found something or someone waiting for you. And let's talk about shootability. Because a 45 ACP and a revolver sounds like it should be a handful, right? But the M1917 was built like a tank. That big, heavy frame soaked up recoil like a sponge, meaning you got all the stopping power without the punishment. Compared to a lightweight snub-nosed revolver, this thing was a Cadillac. Now, as great as half-moon clips were, they had one little problem. They were a pain to deal with. You ever tried to reload in the middle of a fight while fumbling with tiny metal clips? Yeah, not ideal. So eventually, someone had the bright idea to just put a rim on the cartridge. Enter the 45 Auto Rim, a version of the 45 ACP with a proper rim slapped on it, so you don't need clips anymore. It was a simple, elegant fix, and it made life easier for anyone who wanted to shoot a 45 revolver without wrestling with tiny pieces of steel. High-pressure variants of the 45 ACP. Now, let's start with the 45 Super. It looks just like your standard 45 ACP, same dimensions, same general vibe. But don't let that fool you. It's like that quiet kid in school who suddenly starts bench pressing cars over summer break. This bad boy uses stronger brass and higher pressures, which means more velocity, more power, and more wrist pain if you're not ready for it. Then there's the 460 Rowland. Now, this one's just straight up disrespectful. It's still a 45 caliber round, but it's been stretched out a bit and operates at pressures that make it rival certain Magnum revolvers. Yeah, that's right. Someone looked at the 45 ACP and thought, needs more boom. And then because Glock wasn't going to be left out of the chaos, we got the 45 GAP, the Glock Auto Pistol round. It takes the 45 ACP formula and compresses it into a shorter case so it fits in more compact handguns. Less bulk, same stopping power, but good luck finding ammo when you actually need it. Oh, and let's not forget the 451 Detonix Magnum. This one's got a longer case and pressures that will absolutely make your gun ask, "Are you sure about this?" It's like feeding your sedan jet fuel. It might run, but at what cost? Now, if you thought the 45 ACP was just a handgun round, surprise. Some of the most iconic submachine guns ever made were chambered in this big old bullet. Take the Thompson submachine gun, also known as the Tommy gun. Back in the Prohibition era, gangsters loved this thing because when you needed to make a point, nothing said "I mean business" like a magazine dump of 45 ACP. Then we had the M3 grease gun, simpler, cheaper, and about as fancy as a can opener, but effective. The military loved it, and it got the job done with a fraction of the parts. Fast forward a few decades, and we got the MAC-10. If you've ever wondered what it's like to dump an entire mag in under 2 seconds, this little beast will answer that question. Compact, ridiculous fire rate, and chambered in, you guessed it, 45 ACP. And for the modern crowd, there's the Chris Vector. It's got a recoil system that redirects the kick downward, which means less muzzle rise and better control. Basically, someone actually thought, hey, what if we made a 45 ACP submachine gun that doesn't feel like taming a wild horse? Revolutionary. There are rifles and carbines chambered in 45 ACP. One of the most well-known, the Marlin Camp Carbine. Back in the 80s and 90s, this little rifle gave you the option to run 45 ACP in a steadier platform. And the best part? It used standard 1911 mags. Talk about convenience. Another intriguing aspect of the 45 ACP's history involves General George S. Patton, a prominent figure in World War II. Patton was known for carrying an ivory-gripped Colt single-action Army revolver chambered in 45 caliber. This distinctive sidearm became a symbol of his bold personality and leadership style. The 45 ACP also played a role in the creation of the Fitzgerald Special, a customized, snub-nosed revolver. Pioneered by John Henry Fitzgerald, an employee of Colt Firearms from 1918 to 1944, the Fitz Special involved shortening the barrel to 2 inches or less, bobbing the hammer spur, and removing the front half of the trigger guard. This design allowed for quick drawing and firing, making it a precursor to modern snub-nosed revolvers. Notably, Colonel Rex Applegate, a proponent of close-quarters combat, carried a 45 ACP New Service Fitz Special with ivory handles engraved with... Now let's talk about the Colt Gold Cup Trophy, a name that sounds like it should be on a shelf next to your granddaddy's war medals. And on paper, it's got everything going for it. A beautiful brushed satin finish, a 5-inch barrel, and a stainless steel frame that gives it that classic 1911 charm. But here's the kicker. This thing weighs in at 38 ounces. That's heavier than a guilt trip from your mama when you forget to call her. And the price, a whopping $1,699. That's right, folks. For that kind of money, this thing better do my taxes and teach my kid how to throw a football. But here's where the real issue comes in. Despite all the bells and whistles, this gun still struggles with reliability. Sure, it's got a smooth as butter trigger, but when you're dropping that much cash, you don't want a gun that occasionally decides it doesn't feel like feeding properly. Plus, let's talk about that grip safety. They added a beaver tail design, which sounds nice, but unless you have hands the size of a grizzly bear, it can feel a little awkward. It's like buying a sports car and realizing the seat's so stiff your back is gonna file a lawsuit against you. Look, I love the 45 ACP as much as the next guy, but we gotta be real here. This round isn't exactly what you'd call beginner friendly. Shooting this thing feels like getting hit with a polite punch to the palm. And with the Gold Cup trophy, that weight is both a blessing and a curse. It helps absorb some of that kick, sure, but it also makes the gun feel like you're lugging around a brick. If you're planning on carrying this thing all day, get yourself a chiropractor on speed dial. Alright, here's the part that really grinds my gears. The Gold Cup trophy comes with two 8-round magazines. That's it, 8. Meanwhile, we got modern 45 ACP handguns out there pushing 13 or 15 rounds like it's nothing. If you're in a home defense situation, the last thing you want to be doing is scrambling to reload while some dude with bad intentions is knocking on your front door. And let's be honest, if you're spending over $1,500 on a pistol, you should at least get the courtesy of a few extra rounds. Now, credit where credit's due. The trigger on this thing is smooth. It breaks at around 4.5 pounds, crisp as a fresh batch of bacon. But here's the issue, it's got a very specific feel. If you're used to a striker-fired pistol, this thing's gonna feel like switching from driving an automatic to a stick shift on a hill. You gotta know what you're doing, or else you're gonna have a bad time. So, should the Colt Gold Cup trophy have been made? Well, that depends. If you're a competition shooter who wants a fancy 1911 with a smooth trigger and don't mind the occasional feeding issue, then sure, knock yourself out. But if you're looking for a reliable 45 ACP that you can actually count on in a pinch, you might want to look elsewhere. At the end of the day, this thing is like a classic muscle car. Beautiful, full of history, but not exactly the most practical choice when you got modern alternatives that do the job better and for less money. But hey, if you love it, more power to you. Don't be surprised when someone with a $500 polymer pistol outshoots you at the range. So what do you think?